As I was getting ready this morning, I'm looking in the mirror and I notice that she darts off behind me and into our closet. And I continue to get prepared. And I look in the mirror and I start lamenting, I put on a few pounds. I've got more gray hair, and I'm starting to get dark circles under my eyes. And I'm kind of speaking out loud. And I said, honey, could you kindly say something that will build up my ego? And she retorts from the closet, there's nothing wrong with your eyesight. So since there's nothing wrong with my eyesight, I'll share what I've observed relative to safety with Union Pacific over these last 24 or so years. So I have spent a fair amount of time in the operating department, and I'd like to share with you what we've been able to drive relative to safety. It's all about the 3 Ps: people, process, and physical plant. Basically, that's safety. Our mission as a company says we're dedicated to serve. And the only way that we can pull that off with any integrity or efficiency is then takes us to our values. We have a passion for performance. We truly do want to be your best service provider, bar none. That's in our culture. That's how we talk. That's where we want to be. We want to do it in a high ethical way. What we say you can take to the bank. And we want to work as a team. So these numbers that I'm about ready to share with you is percolating through all of that are these themes. Typically when you read about railroad safety, I'd like to share our statistics. We always reference ratios. So when it comes to employee injury information, that's not unlike your businesses. The measure is typically against 200,000 employee hours. The OSHA defined measure. That's also handed to us through the Railroad Administration through the FRA. So we define everything relative to incidents against 200,000 employee hours. Those are our incidents. Now, as you well know, there are reportable incidents. So an employee comes in and says, I bumped my elbow, we report it. That's in our incident number. But did they require medical attention for that? No. If medical attention is needed, then that becomes an FRA reportable, right? I'm sure many of you are with me on that concept. Grade crossings, on the other hand, are relative to train miles, million train miles. So how many incidents within the confines of a crossing, so that's typically 15 feet either side of the pavement of a crossing, anything that happens in there, whether we strike an automobile, a person, a bicycle, wheelchairs, believe it or not, would be considered a crossing incident against our train miles, million train miles. And lastly, our derailment statistics are against also million train miles. Okay, it's easy to get all messed up in these ratios. So we really try to distill it inside UP down to its lowest common denominator. Anything that a dope like myself could understand. So let's get to the raw numbers. Let's just get to raw count. That's easy to talk to our employees when we're just talking counts. So over the last several years, we've been able to drive our employee safety very effectively. We're on a record pace last year, a record pace this year, and I'll talk about how we've administered our safety programs to try to drive improved safety here in just a minute. Grade crossings, we continue to struggle. It's difficult to get into the minds of the motoring public. Many times we occupy the crossing with a train and a driver slams into the side of the train. To the FRA, that's a crossing incident, we report it as such. I'm not sure though how UP can do something different in that environment to change that outcome. though we're working on it. I'll talk about that in just a second. Derailment count, we're on record pace to take us to the lowest derailment count we've ever had. We're very pleased with our performance. Something new that we've introduced this last year and a half, 18 months or so, is derailments inside industry. Heretofore, we have never accounted for that, and now we're starting. Why? Because we expose our employees to risk when we derail inside of customer facilities. Again, we're right up against silos, docks, other customer employees, their equipment. So the last thing that we want to do is take our eye off the ball relative to safety inside our customer facilities. We've seen improvement in this statistic, but I caution everyone, we haven't really wrapped this with risk mitigation protocols like we'd be satisfied with. So we've got work to do on that front. Last year, Union Pacific set the all-time record, at least in our company, and took first place amongst all railroads in North America with an FSI of 0.87. So we had just a little less than 1 injury per 200,000 employee hours. That's basically the way to read that. We continue our record performance through the first half of this year at 0.70. Based on our benchmarking through the first half, talking to our carrier brethren, we believe we continue to hang on to first place. We're going to continue to focus on this as aggressively as we possibly can and try to turn that into a second record year. So it's important that we don't lose context. So heretofore, we've always benchmarked the other railroads. What are they doing to improve safety performance inside the rail industry? To speak a little bit with pride, when you take first place, who are you going to benchmark inside your own industry? So it became necessary for us to look outward. Let's see what other industry is doing. Of course, that always takes us to other modes of transportation. And as this chart implies, we're doing pretty well relative to other modes. So again, we need to look outward. What are others doing? And so there's been a whole effort here to undertake where we're learning from others what works inside their environment. So I think it's interesting to note that railroads generally perform pretty well relative to safety. UP leads the way, but there are other industries here, mining, oil and gas refining, that outpace us. So we spent a fair amount of time with Exxon and locally here with Kiewit to see what they're doing. And we're learning some things. The most important of which is safety is a business process. That does not sound unlike us. It's been a business process for us for a long time. We spend a lot of time when an incident occurs investigating that incident and then wrapping it with mitigation techniques. I'll show you a couple examples here in a minute. And we've moved to just culture. This industry for a very long time, given where it came from out of the military, has a demerit system, or had a demerit system. So an incident occurs, we typically look for what rules were violated, we hold the employees accountable to those rules, and we'd send people home without pay for some period of time. And then we'd expect the employee to come back and be a happy employee and fully productive. I don't know who the heck we thought we were kidding, but that model don't work. So we've really tried to move to just culture. When a mistake occurs, we teach, we coach, we counsel. If that approach doesn't work, then we have formalized training classes that we put the employees in. You get 2 swings of the bat of those formal classes. And after all of that teaching, if you still don't change your ways, then probably railroading isn't right for you. and we pursue disciplinary or dismissal actions at that point. But we like this model. It's been in place now for a little over a year, and we really like the outcome. Employees seem to be responding to it. Here's what we've learned primarily from the benchmarking activities that we've done. Close call reporting, that third bullet up there. Okay? When an incident occurs, we're death on reporting it. There is no tolerance inside our four walls where a manager has an option not to report. We find out about it, that manager is going to pursue a different career. But we are not good about, you know, that car, that rail car came flying by me and almost hit me. Or that tool fell off of that scaffolding and landed just feet away from me. We're not good at recording that information, yet that is risk that is happening inside our organization. So we only have a small visibility to the risk profile that exhibits itself inside our environment. That's what we've learned from our benchmarking activities, and that's exactly where we're headed in 2017. Yes?
Is there anything else in your culture, and there are some things that are strike through your out of red.
Right.
So is there anything else besides not reporting a close call?
So, lie, cheat, and steal, I think we would all recognize is not acceptable. And again, UP will not tolerate any of that. Right. The non-reporting, when you should report, is something that we don't tolerate. And I'd put a third there just as examples, probably our drug and alcohol policy. We have a very robust random testing program. And our regulator, the FRA, says that after an incident, you must test. Now, you're found hot on something, we give you one swing at the bat. You go off, get yourself fixed up, come on back. But you're subject then to a higher testing profile thereafter, and another mistake occurs, no more. We can't tolerate those kind of risks inside our environment. Hope that helps. Give you a few examples.
I'm targeting on safety violations, because it sounds to me like a close call is a safety violation.
Okay. Sure.
Not following some specific railroad procedure that would be punishable by dismissal.
Okay, so there are the three intolerables, as we call them. You keyed off of one, blue flag, or lockout, tagout in our environment, or our vernacular. Third would be a collision. So I'm a train crew, and I slam into another train or equipment. Not cool. And on the engineering side, main track authority violations, being somewhere where you're not authorized to be on track. Even there, we give employees the chance to go through these formal classes, but it is a skip forward type approach. No more coaching, counseling, you're immediately going to go to these classes. So you've progressed yourself quite a bit further down the chain of events. I'm sorry?
Can I ask one quick question because you brought it up?
Yep.
You said you're zero tolerance on you're doing the random drugs. What positions do you be taking on medical marijuana?
Okay, no tolerance. Okay, FRA, you know, we're looking towards the federal government, and until they give relief relative to those type of drugs, UP will not entertain those. Even in states, Colorado, California come to mind. You work for UP, don't find that stuff in your system.
Even on medical, and you're talking recreational, that is legal, but medical, you know, is different from the recreational.
Right. Still, no. Okay, so how are we driving this kind of improvement? We get the organization wrapped around a culture of RIM. Vernacular inside our walls is RIM. Everybody understands that to be risk identification and mitigation. That's what RIM stands for. So everybody's looking at what risks exist in the workplace. So when I came over here, I noticed something about many of you folks in the audience. Many people came up the stairs without putting their hand on the handrail. If you did that over here at the Union Pacific Center, I guarantee you somebody would say something to you. Why? Because our rule is three-point contact. Should you slip, you have another way to grab yourself without face planting into the stairs. Another thing that I noticed is many of you were either talking on your phone or texting. Okay? We're going to talk about here in just a minute, eyes on path. You do both of those kind of things, you're distracting yourself from seeing where your feet are headed. Again, somebody challenge you inside the UP building. That doesn't make you bad people. It just says that our culture is trying to heighten itself relative to what risk to look for. We even take it as far as twice a year going out on the corners of our building over here and looking for people that aren't crossing with the crosswalk. And we'll stop them and talk to them. Now, sometimes those interactions say, you're a nutcase, leave me alone. And others give you quite a few nonverbals as they pass. But the point here is we're trying to teach the organization to be looking for risk. Okay, big data. We're into it big time. We think it's driving these last 18 months. What do I mean by that? ERA, Employee Risk Assessment. There's a model that's percolating every night that's looking for employees that are exhibiting unsafe behavior. Well, how the heck do we do that? We're looking for coaching when we're out doing testing. So we set up efficiency tests. We're actually looking for people that are making unsafe action. And we jot that down into our computer system. Okay? Your prior performance been involved with a derailment. We're looking for absenteeism. Are you going into vacation? Or are you coming out of vacation? There's something like 600 data elements that go into this model. And we're looking for those employees that might have a higher risk of safety concerns. Why? There's 2,500 operating managers out in the field, western two-thirds of the country, and many thousand employees. There's no way that we can look, spend time with, teach all the employees all the time, every day. So this is about focusing the management's attention on those that potentially exhibit more risk. And that's what we're doing with ERA. We're on our 4th iteration of this model. We're constantly fine-tuning it. But we like where we are with it. If you were to take a look at our control charts relative to the number of incidents we've had, it's been a nice downward trend for a decade. Since we turned a lot of this on, it's been a step function. A full standard deviation away from our normal run rate. Something significant has changed, and we believe it's this effort around big data. Mainline analytics, we're trying to do the same thing relative to our mainline and sidings. And let me talk about CAP for just a second. So we turned on, about a year ago, our crossing assessment process, CAP. We're all trained to manage with data. Where the incidents have happened, they're likely to happen again, right? That's the way we're taught. So we developed this model devoid of where the incidents had occurred. In other words, we did not use crossing incident collisions as an independent variable in the model. We're using other data elements, speed of train, speed of vehicles crossing. Is it a cantilevered crossing? Stop sign, just a crossbuck? Is the crossing peaked? Is it short stage off of a freeway or highway? All of that's going into the model, but not where incidents have occurred. Then we've run that model. Now I'm going to tell you, it took several iterations before we think we got this right. But once we got the output from the model, we compared where our higher risk crossings were being projected from the model against where the incidents had occurred. 4% of the crossings that comprise Union Pacific's 31,000 crossings represent almost 25% of the crossing incidents. So we believed we were onto something. Again, now we're focusing management's attention not on the total ocean, but the drips that comprise the ocean. We're looking at those crossings that have higher risk. And we're working with the road authorities to improve those crossings. It's still pretty early to see if we're on the right path here, but this is very unique in the industry. There's a fair amount of churn, both with the FRA and our competitors, to see this model, work with it, see if we can make it better. We're nothing unless we have our employees. So we're trying to develop employee engagement tools. Stop the line. You see me do something unsafe, the expectation is you'd stop me. We're trying to train people not to take exception to that. Thank you, take your feedback, I'm going to move forward. Total safety culture, much has been said about total safety culture, but this is all about a team saying, I've got your back. I'm not going to let you do anything that's unsafe. And I would also say MAP, that just culture that I talked about, changing the discipline approach. MAP is Managing Agreement Professionals for Success. That's what that's all about. It says I'm going to train when a mistake occurs. I'm not going to thump you over the head, send you home without pay. We think we're making some good progress here. All right. Again, we try to keep things very simple and visual when it comes to safety. This is our Swiss cheese model, as we call it. Maybe some of you have seen it, but I thought I'd spool through this fairly quickly. Okay? What we're trying to do here is layer the cheese so that the holes don't line up. Our first layer is process control. Rules, policies, procedures. The written word, basically. Next, we layer in the management side of the house. We're going to train people to coach, be effective coaches. We're going to change our discipline policy so that we're teaching people through MAPs. We're going to try to engage the employee one-on-one. Our peers, that's where our employee engagement activities get involved here. Total safety culture, a thing called courage to care, which again says, I've got your back. I'm not going to let you make a mistake. I'm going to try to intervene. Stop the line. Individual behavior. We spend a lot of time saying, look, don't play the victim. We're all individuals. We're all adults. Take responsibility for your action. We test and we train our employees all year long. From the very formal rules test that we sit down and actually grade for every employee, all the way up to constantly doing efficiency tests. What I mean by that is, if you're a train crew, we're going to change the operating scenario to see how you react consistent with the rules. I'm going to dark out a signal. What are you supposed to do? I'm going to lock a switch. See what you're going to do. That constant training, it's constant reinforcement. Lastly, we're laying in technology. The analytic tools that we talked about. We're big time into drones right now. We like where we're headed with our drone program. I got to take a second. We actually have an amphibious drone. Right? We land in the water, the current takes it under the bridge, films under the bridge in high water events, and on the other side we take back off. Is that cool or what? That's kind of neat. Our CAP program and so on. Anyway, what we have learned, or said more correctly, what I have learned, is you go mess around with any one of these layers of Swiss cheese, it affects other layers in the stack. We changed a rule here about last year that talked about shoving cars. So in other words, instead of the locomotive pulling cars, the cars are ahead of the locomotive being pushed. We changed that rule, and then there was no way our operating employees could comply with that rule and serve our customers. That was kind of a painful 12 hours. But learn from it. You can't change any one of these things without thinking through how the whole safety program is affected. So we've changed our model here to put in these loops of continuous learning. The whole thing's designed to make sure that the holes don't line up so risk can't get to us. That's the long and the short of the switch cheese model. Hopefully that's an effective way to try to get what the organization values and desires to the folks on the ground that are actually doing the work. So let's take a minute to talk about rules in the railroad industry. I won't spend a lot of time here, but I think it is helpful for people to understand where the devil do they come from, how do they get modified. So the rule book, see, and I even brought show and tell. This is my copy of the rule book. Okay? Fancy cover on it, 3-ring binder type approach so you can change the pages quite easily. There's 3,500 rules inside Union Pacific Railroad. Now, there's no way any of us can understand and memorize all of them. That's why we hand the rule book to our employees. Now I'm starting to, as we talked earlier this morning, put on a few years. I like my paper copy, but most folks have it on their electronic device as a PDF, so it's referenceable. It's a lot easier to carry than this thing. The rules, G-Core, the General Code of Operating Rules, is modified and looked at every 5 years by a committee made up of all railroads. Well, 5 years is a long time. So how do we modify those rules when we learn of a new safety concern or we want to impose a new mitigation technique? We do that by virtue of system special instructions. This comes out yearly. So it modifies that rule book. Well, that's another thing I got to carry with me if I'm a train crew. But those darn superintendents out there, I having to been one of them, they have the ability to modify and put special wording. We don't have the ability to modify the rules, but we can interpret them for our territory. And that comes out in timetables. And the timetable for a crew looks something like that, has a profile of the railroad, hills, valleys, curves, and the wording, how we want you to operate that train or equipment as you move across the railroad. And then lastly, if we're doing maintenance, we'll set up what's called a Form B or an advisory Form A, and this goes to the train crews. And it says from this mile pole to this mile pole, I need you to drop the speed of your train to something slower. And in some cases, you need to talk to maintenance employees that are out on line of road. That's how all of that builds up. Why was that important? We are constantly updating our rules. Again, as the organization gets better about looking at risk, we're trying to modify the rules to make sure that people are following them to mitigate the risk that we're seeing. So this is an ever-evolving, constant process. All right, so let's talk about some of those. And I won't go into all this minutia and detail, and I don't plan on pounding through this whole list. And you're thinking to yourselves, oh, thank goodness. PPE, right? Personal protective equipment, required. Safety glasses, hearing, steel-toe boots, with a defined heel. Where I'm headed with all of this is, how do we keep people safe around the equipment? presentation title is Struck By Rolling Stock. Once I'm up on that equipment, I better have that defined heel, since my foot is in the stirrup of the car. I don't want to be sliding through it. Those wheels are just a couple feet away from me. So it's important that we ensure that our employees have defined heels. And that's in fact a test that our operating management, when they're out in the field, look for. We'll come up to our employees and say, lift a foot. It's kind of like we're shoeing a horse. So that I can take a look at your heel. Again, you know, these things wear over time. You want to make sure that your footwear is in good shape. Alert to train movement. As a young lad, I was working out in Montana, cold winter night, snow, light snow is coming down, and like a dope, I'm walking between the rail. Something we never do, right? Never do. I was doing it. I had just stepped out between the two rails, and here comes a car swinging by. They're deadly quiet. It's amazing to me something weighs thousands of tons, fully loaded, can be so damn quiet. But alertness around railroads is absolutely required. We try to teach that. We remind people. Walking and walking near tracks. Okay? There's a saying, it says your feet don't go where your eyes haven't. Eyes on path. We're trying to keep people from falling in holes or soft spots or tripping over the infrastructure that makes up the railroad. Never would we condone somebody stepping on the rail. Why? It gets slippery. And it's funny, that opposing rail is right about where the average person will strike their noggin. And we've had many, many injuries. So never step on a rail. Sufficient distance. Sufficient distance is all about keeping an awareness and away from the equipment. All right, you're coming around a cut of cars. Pretty easy to just scoot around that car and get to the other side and walk. It's a rule in our environment that you need 20 feet. Why? Because if somebody slams into the other side of the equipment with a car move or a locomotive, it's amazing how that equipment can discharge energy and jump right out at you. If you give that 20 feet, it's a safety cushion. Getting an on and off standing equipment. We talked about the 3-point contact. We're teaching 4-point. When you come down off that a car or a locomotive, we expect you to pause with your feet firmly planted and your hands on the grab irons. And then let go. What is that teaching? To make sure that when you let go, you haven't got one foot in a hole and another one on something that's soft that might give way. Crossing through standing equipment, okay? Crawling under those hoppers gets pretty enticing because you've got some room. Not a good idea. If any train crew were to do that, we'd immediately stop the move and address it with them. What we teach is get up on the car, use the crossover platform, because if the car moves, you move with it. There's a bad habit out here where there's nothing more simple than to put your foot, because it's an easy step, up on the uncoupling lever, step up onto the coupler, and over. Bad move. 2014, we had 3 employees that did that, and their foot got crushed when an opposing move moved the coupler, and their foot got caught between the coupler and the bell housing of the car. Stepping from one car to another. If you're in that process and the car moves, all of a sudden the platform you thought you were going to land on's moved, and between the cars you go. So we teach down, onto the ground, and come back up onto the opposing platform. Placing feet, we've talked about a bit. Maintaining a lookout. So when you're involved in a task where your attention is fully drawn and there is equipment moving around you, and it's possible for you to find somebody else to be your lookout, that's what we encourage. For our maintenance away employees, this is required by the federal government. You must have another lookout, another person that's observing for your safety. Work-related rules. We talked a bit about blue flag. This is our industry's lockout tagout rule. If I'm going to work on, under, or around rolling stock, I need to make sure that that track that I'm working on is locked out. Nobody can get to me. So it means the switches are lined away and a blue flag is up, and those switches are locked. And there's a quick diagram of what I mean by that. Pretty simple though. Again, switches on either side of where I'm working are lined away and locked. Nobody can get to me unless I authorize it. I say I'm done working. Switch operation, we teach putting the lock or the hook back in the switch hasp. So if that lock or switch, if the switch itself should open up, you won't pick the switch and derail, possibly causing the car to roll over on someone. Impaired clearances. This is really important. We have a number of older yards, and I know industry has a number of yards where cars come into a curve and the opposing rails are pretty tight. Think about the pivot point of these cars. That wheel, that truck is inset on the car 5-6 feet. So as that car travels through the switch, the nose of that car does not track with the curve. It sticks out. The amount of clearance that you need between equipment lessens quickly. Our recommendation is it's a minimum of 6 feet between rails. That protects from this phenomena. You still have 36 or more inches between equipment that's traversing a switch, or sorry, a curve, and allows an employee to be able to walk through there with safety. If you don't have 6 feet, we strongly recommend that it's posted as tight or close clearances. Keep people out of there. Safety appliances, that's basically the structure and integrity of our ladders and handbrakes. Okay, hatches. Hatch covers. We would really appreciate as you process the car, closing the hatch and the batten bars. We've had examples of batten bars, some hatches up, and we have, especially on the west, high-wide load detectors where we cause damage to them. Outlet gate shut, I think that's pretty well understood with this crowd. Partial loads. If there's a car that for some reason they can't be fully unloaded, we'd like a heads up. The reason for that is now the car is not weighed equally from one end to another. It caused steering problems of that car as they negotiate curves. It's a high derailment risk. Grain spillage. On top, as train crews walk by, wind kicks up, that stuff comes off the car, and even though we're in safety glasses, it can get in one's eye. And also slows down interchange when we're moving between Mexico and ourselves. Car mover capacity. Car movers, of course, are rated for the number of cars. It's awful enticing to go grab one more. And unless your car mover is set up with air, in other words, air brakes, and you've got employees trained in the use of those air brakes, you're taking on some risk. We've had just this year alone 5 instances where customers were handling their cars, not all grain, and that cut got too heavy for their equipment and drug them out to the main line. You know, it doesn't take much, and You have a mainline train traversing that same territory, and now we have a disaster on our hands. Hook and drag. Make sure that you have the equipment, a hold of the equipment. So we teach our train crews to couple in and then try to move the equipment with the brakes still set. If you know that you've got the equipment, you're not going to advance, right? The car won't move, but you know you got a good hook on it. This prevents employees walking around part of the switching crew thinking they got the cars, and then the car breaks away from them and strikes somebody that was not anticipating that the car was really moving under its own momentum. We've had a number of these incidents, both at UP and side industry. Spotting with light brakes is not a good idea. Knock them off. It's a binary decision. Either they're on or they're off. The idea that you leave a light set so that you can spot it right up to a location is causing problems. Wear and tear on the equipment, but more importantly, you're having to use a lot more power, either in your car mover or your locomotive, and that's when mistakes occur, because people will assume or not know how much power is needed, and they potentially blow through end of track, causing damage to structures, etc. Facility rim, track conditions, closed clearances, we've talked about a minute. So, unless there's more questions, I thought we would, yes sir?
You guys, it used to be that you would come out and you replace, car lids and stuff like that, right on the
We do not.
So you never have any,
Correct. As the regulations have gotten more tight, we need fall protection. So obviously we got to take it to a physical location, one of our car shops. We do that work there, but we don't come out into customer facilities any longer.
What about your procedures for, like in the red zone, we call red zone?
Perfect.
Could you cover that a little bit?
Certainly. So I want to step in between cars. I want to tie a handbrake from the ground. I want to make sure that that equipment will not move. So I will ask my engineer, I would like the red zone. That term means gotcha. I'm going to set the brake, and I'm going to put the control of the locomotive in basically neutral. I'm going to take it out of forward or reverse. I'm going to put it in the middle spot, neutral. Set and centered is what we call it. Now the equipment can't move. The engineer will respond, set and center, and they are taught to keep their hands off the controls. Also, we try to encourage not moving in the chair so that you don't bump any of the controls. Set and center, basically freeze. Now I can go in and do whatever, as the conductor, I can do whatever work I need to between the equipment. When I step back out, now I release the red zone and the engineer goes back to doing what they do. Again, an attempt at preventing somebody struck with this equipment. So, yes, sir.
When they step inside our facility, we make sure that one foot is outside the track and one can step in. That way, if there is any movement, you got a foot to push out with.
Perfect. And so,
Both feet caught inside.
we do the same. We do the same. So the question there was, should we keep one foot outside the rail and the other inside? And the answer to that question is yes, because it's a fairly quick move then to get yourself clear of the rail. Especially when you're lacing air hoses and you're down low, you want to be able to spring up out of there quickly. All right, we talked about blue flag. Cut me off where I need to. But a few questions here. We talked about blue flag. That is our lockout tagout for the industry. When walking near track, we definitely want people to scan, notice, and adjust. SNA is what we call it inside our railroad. We want to cross with the least amount of time when you're in that area of risk. So in other words, inside the rails. So the fastest way to do that, it's a straight line, is the shortest distance between 2 points, is a 90-degree angle. And you're clear of the risk zone. And we want to avoid stepping in areas that are risky, muddy, puddles of water, etc. So the answer here is all the above. We talked about this, so in curved track, what's the distance we're looking for? 6 feet, right. Okay, we talked a little bit about when walking around a cut of equipment. How many feet do you need?
You said 20, but C's the answer.
Okay, 20. How about when I got to go in between cars? I didn't talk about this, and I think this is an important concept we need to talk about. Okay? We're actually teaching 100. So we want to separate the equipment and make sure that I got 100 feet between myself when I'm working on the end of one car, 100 feet between the equipment. Why? Because if that car of cars comes back at me, I can get out of there fairly straight away. 100 feet really isn't all that long. I encourage you to go back to your facilities and take a look. But it does give you that safety buffer. So actually D here, all right, is the answer. If there are no other questions, I'll get out of the way.
Who does your formal training after, you teach, coach, and train? And the next step is that a supervisor or a safety director or?
Yes. So the question here is, who does these formalized training? It is the operating management team. We don't want to turn it over to somebody who has good intentions but may not understand the operating environment. Said differently, we don't want HR instructors to come into our environment because they may not understand what we're up against. It's the operating management team. All right, thank you everyone.